There was a time when the garden didn't end in October. It transformed. Our grandparents knew a secret we've completely forgotten, that the bite of frost wasn't an end, but a beginning. Today, we're uncovering 15 plants that don't just survive the cold, they are perfected by it, unlocking flavors that are impossible to find in any supermarket. The promise of winter garlic. There was a time when the end of the harvest was not an ending at all. For many old gardens, it was a quiet beginning, marked by the simple act of pressing garlic cloves into the cooling October earth. This was not a task of haste, but one of foresight, a continuation of a cycle that supermarkets have allowed us to forget. The largest, most perfect cloves from the summer's harvest were chosen to become the seeds for the next. They understood a simple truth of the soil. Garlic does not just survive the winter, it needs the winter. The long, cold months in the ground are not a period of sleep, but one of transformation. This extended chill triggers the process that allows a single clove to divide and swell into the large, flavorful bulbs of the following summer. It was a quiet partnership with the seasons, a stark contrast to our modern expectation of year-round availability. Instead of being rushed by a spring planting, the garlic was given time to build a deep and resilient foundation. The act itself was a lesson in patience, a promise of pungent flavor buried in the dormant soil. It was proof that the richest rewards often come only after the longest, coldest wait. But this quiet wisdom wasn't just for roots meant to sleep through winter. It extended even to the most delicate of greens. Spinach, sweetened by the cold. We think of fresh greens as a product of summer sun, often remembering a plant that could turn sharp and bitter in the heat. But our grandparents knew a different version of spinach. One born not of warmth, but of a patient tolerance for the cold. It was sown in the cooling soil of October, a time when most other planting had ceased, and it grew with a slow, deliberate energy that summer greens never possess. The real transformation, however, waited for the frost. As the temperatures dropped below freezing, a quiet alchemy took place within the leaves. To protect its cells from the ice, the plant began to produce natural sugars, a kind of organic antifreeze that changed its very nature. This was not merely a survival tactic. It was a culinary gift. The leaves lost their sharp mineral edge and took on a remarkable sweetness and a tender, almost velvety texture. While modern stores now offer us greens year-round, they can never replicate the deep, complex flavor of spinach that has been cured and sweetened by the patient hand of winter itself. It was a simple lesson from the old garden. It taught that hardship does not always diminish, and that sometimes the most surprising sweetness can be found in the heart of the cold. But what if the cold could do more than just sweeten? What if it could act as a chef, completely transforming a vegetable once thought to be impossibly tough? When frost was the finest chef. Long before it was a modern superfood, kale was the rugged workhorse of the winter garden. It was a plant known more for its stubborn endurance than for any particular delicacy. Yet it held a quiet secret that only the first hard frost could truly unlock. To harvest it too early was to know only its tough, bitter side, a fibrous leaf that challenged the cook. But old-timers knew that this was a vegetable that asked for patience and that its reward was worth the wait. They understood that the frost was not an adversary, but an artist. When the first deep cold settled over the garden, a transformation began within the dark green leaves. The freezing temperatures acted as a slow, invisible chef, breaking down the plant's complex, bitter starches and converting them into simple sugars. The rigid fibers softened, the sharp taste mellowed, and the kale took on a rich, earthy sweetness that no amount of kitchen preparation could ever replicate. To go out into the crisp air and snap a leaf from a frost-covered stalk was to harvest a vegetable at its absolute peak. It was a form of slow cooking that happened right in the garden, a reminder of a time when people didn't fight the seasons, but instead understood and used their power. This principle worked wonders on rugged leaves, but it held a different kind of magic for the most delicate greens of all. The forgotten winter lettuce. A crisp salad in the middle of winter feels like a modern convenience. A plastic box of greens shipped from some distant, sunnier world. Yet for many old-timers, enjoying fresh lettuce in the colder months was a much simpler affair, requiring only a short walk to the backyard garden. It was a possibility rooted not in technology, but in a knowledge of plants that we have largely set aside. They understood that not all lettuce was created equal, or destined for the long days of summer. There were other kinds, hardy varieties cultivated over generations specifically for their endurance, with names that spoke of their ability to withstand the cold. Unlike their summer cousins, which raced to maturity and quickly turned bitter in the heat, these winter lettuces were in no hurry. They grew slowly in the cool soil, a deliberate pace that allowed them to develop a superior texture and a deeper, sweeter flavor. The extended chill concentrated their character, creating a crispness that fast-growing commercial greens can never match. Sheltered under a simple cold frame or even just a layer of snow, they remained a source of fresh food through the leanest months. We have gained the ability to buy lettuce any day of the year, but perhaps we have lost the satisfaction of growing a lettuce that was truly and deliciously of its season. But this wisdom wasn't just for delicate leaves. It could also be applied to the most common fiery roots, turning them into something else entirely. Radishes, cured by the cold. The summer radish is a creature of impulse, often known for its fiery, aggressive bite. Rushed by the heat, its growth can be a gamble, sometimes resulting in a woody texture or a sharp pungency that overtakes its flavor. But in the old gardens, there was another kind, a radish whose character was not forged in heat, but patiently cured by the cold. It was the product of an autumn sowing, and it was an entirely different vegetable. Planted in the cooling earth of October, the radish was relieved of the pressure to mature quickly. The steady, gentle chill of the soil slowed its development, allowing it to form a dense, succulent flesh with a satisfying, crystalline crispness. The flavor, too, was transformed. The overwhelming heat was replaced by a clean, bright sharpness that was refreshing rather than searing. It was a vegetable in perfect balance. By planting a new row every couple of weeks, a small but continuous harvest could be pulled from the soil well into the season, each root a small, perfect gem. It was a simple but profound lesson, taught by the humble radish. It proved that in the garden, the quickest path is rarely the one that develops the deepest and most rewarding character. This principle of slow, patient development led to an even greater prize, a root that could become a buried treasure. The buried treasure of winter carrots. In the age of refrigeration, we have forgotten that the earth itself was the first and best root cellar. Long before a humming appliance kept the harvest, the soil was entrusted with its preservation. For the carrot, a winter spent in the cold ground was not merely a method of storage, but the secret to its profound transformation from a simple vegetable into a buried treasure. After the last warm days of autumn, the carrot patch was not cleared, but covered. A thick blanket of straw or fallen leaves was laid over the rows, insulating the soil from the harshest freezes. Beneath this protective layer, as the chill seeped into the ground, a quiet miracle began. To protect itself, the carrot started converting its starches into sugars, concentrating its essence with each successive frost. This natural process created a root of unparalleled sweetness and a dense, satisfying crispness. Harvesting in winter became an act of excavation, brushing away snow and mulch to pull a perfectly preserved, vibrant orange root from the cold, dark earth. It was a form of sweetness that could never be found in the summer garden, a flavor saved and magnified by the very hardship of the season. It taught a simple trust in the ground, a belief that the earth holds on to its gifts, releasing them slowly, long after the warmth is gone. Some plants, however, offered not one gift, but two. The two gifts of the humble turnip. In an age of greater self-reliance, a plant was often judged by its generosity. The most valued crops were those that gave more than was asked of them, offering multiple gifts from a single sowing. By this measure, the humble turnip, planted in the cool, forgiving soil of autumn, was a cherished staple of the garden, for it always provided two distinct harvests. The first gift was its leaves. As the young seedlings grew thick in their rows, they would be carefully thinned to allow the strongest to mature. These tender, peppery tops were never wasted. They were gathered and served as the season's last fresh cooking greens. The second gift, the root, was left to swell in the cool earth. Unlike a turnip stressed and hurried by summer heat, which can turn woody and bitter, the autumn root grew slowly and patiently. This gentle pace, combined with the chill in the soil, produced a flesh that was dense, sweet, and remarkably mild. A comforting staple for the leaner months ahead. We have since learned to separate the root from the leaf, often buying them as strangers in the produce aisle. But the old garden understood they were part of the same quiet story, a lesson in how to find abundance in a single, resourceful plant. This same seasonal wisdom could even transform a vegetable's very color and essence. The deep earth sweetness of beets. There is a particular flavor in a fall-grown beet that tastes of the deep earth itself. It is a concentrated sweetness that speaks of cool soil and the slow, patient work of a season winding down. This was the flavor our grandparents knew, a taste that has become elusive in an age of year-round harvests. Many who claim to dislike beets have likely only tasted the product of summer heat, a root often stressed into having a harsh, muddy flavor. But the beet is a vegetable that thrives not in struggle, but in stability. Planted in the gentle and forgiving climate of autumn, it is relieved of the hardship of heat. This allows the root to grow at a steady, unhurried pace, devoting all its energy to the development of character. The cool soil encourages the concentration of sugars, balancing the earthy notes with a rich, complex sweetness. The color deepens as well, becoming a solid, uniform crimson, a jewel formed in the quiet darkness. It becomes the very best version of itself. It serves as a quiet reminder from the old garden. It shows that the richest and most authentic flavors are not forced by intensity, but are instead nurtured by a gentle season and given the gift of time. For some vegetables, however, this timing was not just about flavor, but about survival itself. The winter hardy cabbage. Long before the era of refrigerated shipping, a vegetable's most prized virtue was its ability to keep. Flavor was important, but longevity was the key to sustenance through the lean months. By this practical measure, the cabbage planted in autumn was not just a vegetable. It was one of the garden's most vital assets, a promise of food for the winter ahead. Unlike a spring cabbage, which must race against the coming heat and pests, the fall cabbage is grown in its ideal element. Transplanted into the cooling soil of early autumn, it thrives in the crisp air, steadily growing into a dense and heavy head. The leaves wrap themselves into a tight, solid sphere, a natural fortress of preservation. A light frost was not seen as a threat, but as a final, perfecting touch. It would chase away any hint of bitterness from the leaves, replacing it with a mild sweetness that spring cabbage rarely achieves. This dense, sweet head was not only superior for the table, but was perfectly suited for months of storage in a cool root cellar. Today, we look for freshness in the produce aisle, a convenience delivered daily. But there was a deeper kind of security in the sight of those pale, solid heads, a tangible assurance of hearty meals to come, earned from the soil and kept by the season's grace. Yet there was another member of this family for whom the frost was not just a perfecting touch, but an absolute requirement. The revelatory Brussels sprout. For many, the Brussels sprout is a maligned memory, a bitter dish served out of obligation. This unfortunate reputation, however, comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of the plant, for the old-timers knew a crucial secret. A sprout harvested before the first hard frost is a vegetable that has not yet found its true character. It is a promise unfulfilled. All through the cool days of autumn, the tall, strange-looking stalks would stand in the garden, their miniature heads forming in tight spirals. To an impatient eye, they looked ready for weeks. But the wise gardener left them be, knowing that the sprouts still held a bitterness that only the season itself could cure. The real harvest began after the first deep, biting frost had descended upon the garden. That intense cold was the necessary catalyst, fundamentally changing the vegetable from the inside out. It converted the harsh starches into sugars, transforming a sharp-tasting morsel into something tender, nutty, and remarkably sweet. The revelation was in the waiting. More than any other vegetable, the Brussels sprout offers a lesson in perfect timing. Its most delicious flavor cannot be forced or hurried. It is a gift, given only to those who have the patience to wait for the cold. This idea of patient preparation was the secret to the most foundational vegetable of all. The foundation of flavor: overwintered onions. Nearly every savory meal begins with the humble onion, the very foundation of flavor. Generations past understood that the strongest foundations are never rushed, and for the largest and best-keeping onions, the work began not in the flurry of spring, but in the quiet foresight of autumn. It was a method rooted in a deep understanding of a plant's unseen life. The typical spring-planted onion is in a race against time, forced to establish its roots and grow its bulb in a single, hurried season. The overwintered onion, however, has the gift of patience. Tucked into the still warm soil of October, it dedicates the cool, dormant months to one vital and invisible task: creating a sprawling and robust root system.
This is the period of quiet preparation. When the long, bright days of spring finally arrive, the plant is already anchored and waiting.
All of its energy, drawn from that powerful foundation, is channeled into explosive growth, resulting in a larger, denser bulb with a richer flavor and a resilience that allows it to keep for months on end. It was a simple principle applied to the most fundamental of vegetables. The most impressive strength is always built on a foundation that was established slowly, long before the reward was ever in sight. But no vegetable taught the lesson of patience more profoundly than the one that waited all winter long for its sweetness. The enduring parsnip. In the heart of winter, when the memory of summer's sweetness had long faded, the garden offered one last remarkable gift. It came not from a protected plant, but from a pale, unassuming root left behind in the frozen soil, seemingly forgotten under a blanket of snow. This was the enduring parsnip, a vegetable whose perfection was not just enhanced by the cold, but was entirely dependent on it. Unlike other roots that are simply improved by a frost, the parsnip is utterly redefined by it. A parsnip pulled from the ground too early, in the mild days of autumn, is a starchy and uninspired thing. Its true character lies dormant, waiting for the alchemy of a deep and lasting chill. Only after weeks of exposure to freezing temperatures do its starches finally convert into a complex, perfumed sweetness. Long before sugar was a common staple, this was the winter's confection, a treasure dug from the icy earth to sweeten puddings and stews. It was a flavor not merely preserved by hardship, but created by it. The parsnip remains the garden's most patient teacher. It is a quiet reminder that the most profound and wonderful transformations are often born directly from enduring the longest and harshest season. Yet, among these giants of the winter garden, there was also a forgotten hero, small and subtle. A forgotten green, mach, in the quietest corners of old gardens. Long after most plants had surrendered to winter, a small, spoon-shaped green could often be found. It grew in unassuming rosettes, sometimes peeking right through a layer of snow. It had several gentle names: corn salad, lamb's lettuce, but today, the name it goes by most often is simply forgotten. This was mach, a plant of incredible fortitude and exquisitely subtle character. It was the true green of winter, a salad leaf that did not need the protection of glass or the expense of heat to survive. It was so perfectly adapted to the cold that it could endure temperatures down to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, a feat most other greens could never manage. Its flavor was the opposite of what one might expect from such a hardy plant. It was not tough or bitter, but delicate, with a soft, velvety texture and a distinctive nutty sweetness. It asked for almost nothing from the gardener, often sowing its own seeds to ensure its gentle return the following year, a persistent gift in a sleeping landscape. Its near disappearance from the modern table is telling. In our pursuit of large, uniform greens shipped from afar, we have overlooked the small, resilient plants that knew how to thrive in their own season, offering a delicate taste of freshness in the harshest of times. This same seasonal wisdom could even tame the most impatient of herbs. The resilient cilantro. Nearly every gardener knows the particular frustration of summer cilantro, an herb that seems to exist in a constant state of hurry. It rushes to flower and set seed, a fleeting presence that vanishes just as you begin to enjoy it. But this impatience is not a flaw in the plant itself, but a misunderstanding of its nature, for there was always a calmer, more generous season for this herb to flourish. Cilantro is a creature of cool weather. The long days and intense heat of summer are a signal of stress, a frantic message to end its life cycle as quickly as possible. Gardeners of the past understood this inherent restlessness and offered the plant a gentler alternative. Sown in the cooling soil of autumn, as the days grew shorter and the light softer, the cilantro was relieved of its urgency. It would settle in, producing a lush, fragrant rosette of leaves that could be harvested for months, not mere weeks. The chill in the air seemed to concentrate its bright, clean flavor, and it would often endure the first frosts, a resilient source of seasoning. It's a simple shift in timing that reveals the plant's true character. It reminds us that the greatest rewards in a garden often come not from forcing a plant to fit our schedule, but from listening and finding the quiet season where it truly belongs. The final lesson, however, was about more than just harvesting. It was about giving back. The soil builders, fava beans. The final act of the autumn garden was often one not of taking, but of giving back. It was a gesture rooted in the understanding that one cannot draw from the earth endlessly without nourishing it in return. And so, certain plants were sown not only to feed the family, but to feed the very soil that sustained them, ensuring the continuation of the cycle. While nearly all other beans are creatures of summer heat, the fava bean is a cool season warrior. Sown in the fall, its seeds would sprout and grow slowly, able to endure temperatures down to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. It offered the gift of an early spring harvest of protein-rich beans, a welcome sight after a long winter. But its second, more vital gift was left behind in the ground. As the fava bean grew, its roots worked in quiet partnership with the soil, drawing nitrogen from the air and fixing it in the earth, leaving the garden bed richer and more fertile for the crops that would follow. It was a plant that fed the family and then fed the future. This was the ultimate wisdom of the autumn garden. It was a deeper conversation with the seasons, a trust that winter was not an end, but a time of slow, essential work. It taught patience, foresight, and the profound grace of working within nature's own patient rhythms, rather than simply demanding from them. So, this is the lost wisdom of the autumn garden. It's a blueprint for patience, for flavor, and for a deeper partnership with the seasons. The secret isn't a forgotten seed or a magic trick. It's a simple shift in timing, proving that the best rewards are waiting for us on the other side of the cold.